It's important to talk taxes. No Canadian should have to pay too much for government bloat. We know that. It's a given. But here's the thing. No successful retail politician can run on a platform all about reducing government bloat. Because when it comes down to brass tacks, many Canadians don't think about those numbers when election time rolls around. They think about what's in a candidate's economic plan for them. If they think a candidate will take away a service or program they find useful, guess how they'll vote. So how can fiscally conservative politicians improve their image, sell their message more effectively? Joining us via Skype is Jason Clemens, Executive Vice President of the Fraser Institute. Jason, I'm sure that this is something you're thinking all the time. You know, you think about charts and public policy and macro this and micro that. But the average voter is thinking about a specific government service. And if the opponent of the fiscal conservative makes the case that you vote for this fiscal conservative guy, he's going to take away your whatever it is, fill in the blank, your home care, your medical care, your pension check, whatever. So you tell me, how do you think about how to communicate fiscal conservative in a successful way that goes beyond what I'll call preaching to the choir?
Sure. Well, I think there's two aspects to the discussion. The first is, who is better placed to make the decision for that individual or the family? So, for instance, when it comes to educational decisions for children, are we better placed having parents more involved or less involved? Are we better off having parents making those decisions with greater choice? Or are we better off to have a system where wherever you live, that's basically the school your kids get to go to? And so changing the discussion from the one that you've laid out to who is empowered to make the decisions and who's best positioned to make those decisions, I think is a far better way to engage, particularly those in the middle of the political spectrum, who I think have a much more practical bend to themselves. In other words, what they want is a better life for themselves and their kids. And so when we engage with them on matters of healthcare, on education, on a whole range of issues, one of the things we're trying to engage with is who's better placed to make those decisions. The second aspect that I think is important is not to make the discussion about less government spending or more government spending. It's about better spending. And so we have our own experience on this, for example, in the 1990s when we reformed welfare. It wasn't just about reducing welfare spending. It was much more about, are we dealing with the underlying problems of those folks who are in welfare right now? And the overwhelming majority of Canadians who were looking and engaged in welfare at the time, and remember, we were almost 12% of the population on welfare in the mid-1990s. And Canadians were broadly saying the system's broke. And so it wasn't just about cutting spending. It was about doing a better job with what we had. And so you saw reforms in Ontario, Alberta, Saskatchewan, British Columbia, New Brunswick, very different in the different provinces, but a real push to reform the spending so that we get better spending. And I think there are real examples in Canada and outside of Canada about how we can spend less but get better results by reforming the way in which we spend.
Let's talk briefly about two aspects of every budget provincially that's huge, outside of interest being paid on the debt, and that's health and education. Sure. If you sell the idea as a fiscal conservative that you want to have just as many doctors, perhaps more, just as many nurses, perhaps more. In other words, you want to increase frontline services. But what you want to cut down on, is not health care delivery. What you want to cut down on is all of those bureaucrats, all of that administration, all of that fat that gets in the way of frontline service. Same thing with schools. You don't want to cut teachers and teachers' aides. You don't want to cut classroom technology. You don't want to cut stuff that affects the kids. You want to cut all of that administration, all of that fat, all of those people involved in the administration of education. That's where the fat is, and that's what you want to cut. Now, you tell me, does that work for you as a fiscal conservative? Because I think that works for a lot of independent voters who don't see themselves as conservatives or liberals. They're just citizens.
I certainly think that's part of the discussion. I think another part, though, is to put real meat on the bone, so to speak, which is, for example, in healthcare. We can look to other countries like Switzerland who have universal care. It's portable. Those are two bedrock principles in the Canadian system. But Switzerland's system doesn't even measure wait times because they're so irrelevant. Or we could look at the Netherlands that spends about the same as Canada does on healthcare, but again, almost no wait times, better outcomes than Canada. And so we're putting real-world examples on the table to debate and discuss how to best perform the healthcare system in Canada. And I think that helps Canadians get past that it's not just a theory or some vague concept, that there are other countries right now who have universal care who are doing a much better job than us in terms of using resources in the healthcare system to actually deal with healthcare issues. The other aspect of that is to continue to point out that many of the problems in the Canadian system have almost nothing to do with how much money we spend. So on education, for example, we spend much less than our friends to the south, the Americans, on K-12 education, but we get much better results. And so the issue, again, is to frame it correctly, that we want to look at real-world examples, other countries that are doing a better job than us, and countries who are doing a less better job than us, particularly if they're spending more money. Because I think part of that debate is really refuting this notion that the problem is we just need more money. And so if we just throw more money at these problems, we solve them. But again, I think it's quite important to put real-world examples on the table so that Canadians can get past the concept to, hey, there are other countries that look like us, that have similar histories or that have shared values, who are doing a better job in these areas, and we can learn lessons from those countries.
Jason, thank you so much for this. It's been a wonderful discussion, as always. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.